I'd like to welcome Kirsty Richards from Atmosphere Resort in the Philippines. Kirsty is a marine biologist and a lead dive instructor at Atmosphere Resort in Dumaguete. It is situated along the Darwin coastline where some of the world's rarest critters reside, including our featured wild fact critter, the frogfish. In this first Positive Impact interview, I'd like to ask Kirsty about frogfish and their environment and ask how isolation has affected and improved after the respite from tourism, dive boats and divers on the most popular sites she visits. Hi Kirsty, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure. Just got a few questions for you about our wild fact, the frogfish. So the Darwin coastline offers many muck diving sites. What diversity of frogfish do you find on the sites you visit?
So we are actually very lucky here in Darwin that we get a range of species of frogfish, which tends to be one of our guests' favorite little critters that they would like to see when they're here. So we have everything from, we see very tiny juvenile frogfish that could be no more than a few centimeters long, up until the giant frogfish, which at their maximum size can probably get 30 to 40 centimeters. We do have a frogfish season, which is probably beginning around February and goes well into May, June, but we're also lucky enough that we can find frogfish all year round.
So frogfish are a really bizarre fish. Can you tell us a little about what you love about frogfish?
So they are very bizarre, you're very correct. They don't look like your typical fish. One of my favorite things is that they don't really have their gill slits behind their eyes like a standard fish would. We say that their gills are actually in their armpits, so just behind their pectoral fins. So when you see them moving about on the reef, the main way that they are moving around is that they will gulp water and then they will shoot it out of their armpits, almost like a jet propulsion, which makes them look like they are almost hopping around the reef, which I would imagine might be one of the ways that they got their name, frogfish. So they're quite clumsy in their movement. They don't exactly look like they're designed to be underwater, but they've obviously found a niche in the marine environment that is working for them. So it's really unusual to see.
So what other characteristic that you could highlight for us? They have a really peculiarly large mouth. They're using all those teeth, or is there a different way that they feed?
So one of the ways that frogfish can feed is that they will sit very still on the reef or the rocks and the rubble, wherever we find them. And their first dorsal spine just on their head has actually been modified into what looks like a fishing rod, which is called the alyssum. And on the end of that rod is a lure, or official name is the esker. And each different species of frogfish, that lure on the end of the rod will look slightly differently because each species is trying to attract a slightly different type of prey. So it will sit very still and almost send out this fishing rod. And once something has crept close enough to the lure, they're able to open their mouth incredibly wide, and they have one of the fastest engulfments of any animal in the animal kingdom, and they can actually swallow something that's twice as big as they are. So they open up this huge mouth, like this sucking action sucks in the prey, and then they can sit and happily digest their meal without having too much physical exertion.
So I know from my personal experience with frogfish, I had an interesting encounter just recently. I found a frogfish 2.5 kilometers up a freshwater creek, and
Oh, wow.
in less than a foot of water in the mangroves. I found a striated frogfish, and I was fortunate enough to experience that very fast action of gulping a fish down. And the only reason why I knew that it happened was because there was a little piece of the tail still hanging out of its mouth, didn't manage to gulp completely, and so it had to take a second gulp, and it's the only reason why I knew it had happened. It happens lightning fast. Can you, is it like 1/16 of a second or something like that. It's incredibly fast. And could you also explain maybe how they can sit there disguised so well? Is it what is it about them that makes them invisible to their prey?
So you're right, they do make this mouth actually incredibly quickly. It's the fastest engulfment of any invertebrate. So they've definitely got that down to a T. And they do have a form of what we call aggressive mimicry, which is when you're a fish underwater, you've kind of got a couple of options. You either make yourself fast and be able to move and chase your prey, or you have the option to sit very still and essentially blend in and camouflage with your environment. And that's what these guys have decided to do. So they can change color. It's not instantaneous like it is with a cephalopod, like a cuttlefish or an octopus, but over a period of maybe a few days to a few weeks, they can slowly blend in with their background. And one of my old colleagues in a previous job was doing some coral bleaching work in the Maldives, and they actually experienced a frogfish camouflaging into a bleached coral. So the Maldives has experienced a vast amount of coral bleaching over the last few years, and if a frogfish is pretty happy, it generally is going to stay in the same spot. And this guy had chosen this beautiful massive coral to be its home. It camouflaged into it, and unfortunately that coral then bleached, and the frogfish had to decide whether to move off, or he actually just decided to camouflage himself. So he turned bright white and even put like the mold and the algae patches on them. And that was actually the first case ever known to science of a frogfish bleaching into a bleached coral.
That is incredible. Wow. Another kind of, I think, unusual behavior that a frogfish does is yawning. Can you explain why a frogfish yawns?
I don't even know if scientists as a whole know why they yawn. There's an incredible amount of things that we just don't know, especially when it comes to critters and the weird and wonderful fish and invertebrates that we find along Darwin's coast. It could be for oxygen. It could be that they need to keep that movement of their mouth going. Like if we're sat down for too long, maybe we need to get up and stretch every now and again, just so that reaction time, especially the engulfing, that they can then take advantage of any prey situation that may come along. Or as they say, it might be a case of getting extra oxygen over their gills and shooting it out their armpits for aeration and things.
Mm-hmm. So can you explain why muck diving is the place to find a frogfish?
So muck diving is increasing in popularity. I think maybe 5, 10 years, 15 years ago, it wasn't really a thing. But especially along the coast here in Darwin, it's only going one way, and that is up. People are getting incredibly passionate about it. And it's so much more different than diving on a reef. When you're diving and you're muck diving, it's almost like a treasure hunt. And I think people love to see the weird and the wonderful. And these kinds of sites here in Darwin, we're very fortunate that we seem to have just the best kind of environment for all of these little critters, and especially frogfish. They seem to like this dark volcanic sand that we have because we're a volcanic island. And along the coast, our coastline is very gently sloping. So as you're diving, you don't have to go too deep, and there is a lot of habitat for these kinds of critters to live on. And it seems like we don't generally find frogfish on the reefs, although occasionally we'll see giant frogfish around Apo. But they do like to sit amongst the rocks and the rubble, and even sometimes just on the bare sand. And it might be a case of that's where they're going to find the most amount of prey. Usually in the animal kingdom, you're going to do things for one of a couple of reasons, either to mate or to eat. And if you don't have to expend any energy, then you're not going to. So I'm guessing they've found a nice place so they can just sit and rest and just send out that lure with the esker on the end and wait for small invertebrates, small fish to pass by. And if they're happy where they are, then they're generally not going to move too far from that.
What impact have you seen in your area since COVID-19?
Good question. So we are living in strange times. I don't think many of us predicted that this would happen even just a few months ago. So here in Darwin, we had a couple of things happen quite quickly. The restrictions on movement around the Philippines made that a lot of our guests and a lot of tourists had to leave the Philippines quite quickly. So over a period of a few days, the amount of divers and tourists in this particular area dropped significantly. And then not too long after that, it was advised by our government that all diving should be stopped, which has good and bad connotations with it. But one thing that our marine life is now going to have the chance to do is just have a bit of a reprieve from the amount of divers and snorkelers and boats and boat noises that are happening along the coast. I think one of the biggest kind of challenges in this area is with the increasing number of divers is to ensure that those divers are diving sustainably. And as the saying goes, they're leaving only bubbles. Especially with muck diving, when you want to get incredibly close to something, not all divers know how to do that the correct way. And they can inadvertently leave that dive site having had a negative impact on it. So things like kicking up dust with your fins and moving the sediment around, it might not directly affect our critters, but if you're having all that sediment pushed into the water column, it starts to settle in different areas and can stir things up. So especially this time of year, kind of unfortunately for us, maybe kind of April, May, June is some of our top critter spotting seasons. The wind is dropping, the ocean is going incredibly flat, so we are all desperate to get out of there. But it's also one of the best times that our critters are breeding and interacting, and the juveniles are growing. So without having all that disturbance and divers staring at them with cameras, as you say, then hopefully we're going to have a much higher success rate in terms of breeding and the juveniles becoming adults, the adults becoming breeding adults. So in the long scheme of things, and touch wood, next year when you guys are here with us, we're going to have a bumper year of critters because they've had that chance to rest and recuperate and make as many juveniles as they possibly can without being disturbed by us guys.
So how are you coping with isolation?
I'm coping surprisingly well. I mean, I'm a pretty laid back person anyway, so it doesn't faze me too much. And to be honest, if you could be stuck anywhere in the world, atmosphere is not a bad place to be. When we have the ocean, we have the pool, the sun is shining. We still have internet, so we can communicate with family and friends. I think if I was back in my old flat in the middle of London, I might not be coping quite as well. But to be able to walk along the beach and enjoy the sunshine and have a swim it's not too bad. Don't feel too sorry for us.
Yeah. So, do you have a new focus or a project that you're working on during this time? Maybe you're developing your specialty course that you offer at the Atmosphere Resort?
So we do, yep, you're correct. I have been writing a new PADI specialty called the Critters specialty, and it focuses mainly on the critters that we find here in Darwin. And overwhelmingly, I get a lot of questions from guests that we don't really know the answers to. Even simple questions that I get asked regularly, if you look into the scientific literature, we just don't know. So the specialty has been created to address some of those questions in terms of it gives all my students the chance to learn a bit more about our major taxa or the major groups, so things like cephalopods, certain invertebrates, certain crustaceans, certain types of fish like your frogfish, and it delves into the science of what we do know and how to characterize them, how to tell species apart, what defines one from the other. And then it challenges my students to go out and do 2 critter dives or 2 muck dives. We have some specially designed colorful slates with images on, and I challenge my students to find 10 species across 2 different dives. So the first dive, I might give them a bit of a help and kind of hang around in a certain area if I can see like an ornate ghost pipefish or a frogfish, and just give them an indication that somewhere in these few meters is something of interest. And then the second dive, we just back off. We let the students essentially lead the dive, and they are hunting like our dive masters and our dive guides would do, which I think they seem to enjoy. It's great when you have a few people doing it at the same time that kind of bounce off each other, and it can get quite competitive. So that's something that I'm very looking forward to getting back into when the guests and the divers all come back to us. But in the meantime, when it's been so quiet here, it's nice to have a bit of downtime, especially to read up on the science. As I say, there's not much we know, but things are starting to delve into the muck diving area. Historically, tropical marine research has focused overwhelmingly on coral reefs. And it's only in the last few years, I believe, with the popularity of muck diving, that researchers and scientists are starting to turn their eyes away from the reef and onto the sediment and the rocks and the rubble to find out and answer certain questions that have been hanging over our heads for a long time.
Excellent. Kirsty, thank you so much. I've absolutely loved this chat with you today. And we really look forward to visiting you and seeing you hopefully in 2021, so next year. Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.